Void Miner, Guild of Stone, Part 1. Prelude. The Dust Widow groaned as it came out of drift, a long metallic shudder running through her bones as Kara watched the viewplates come alive. A wash of light spread across the glass. The hub. It was no cradle, no ruin, no haunted cavern of stone and circuitry. This was alive, and she felt the pulse of it even from kilometers out. The belt hub filled the viewport like a spoked wheel of steel and fire. Great arms jutted outward, docking pylons glowing with signal lights. Cargo haulers drifted in long queues, their battered hulls patched with mismatched plates. Miners came in hot from the rock fields, belching exhaust as if the black itself was chasing them. There was no silence here. Even without the comms open, Kara could almost hear the place breathe. It was a shock after the quiet. The widow had been still for days, drifting between suns. Just her and Arg, two figures clinging to the same silence. Now that silence cracked open, spilling noise and color into the dark. Kara leaned forward in the co-pilot's chair, elbows on knees, staring out at the hub. "Looks busy," she muttered. Beside her, Arg grunted, eyes fixed on the console. His thick fingers moved across the worn keys, feeding in their transponder code, watching for clearance. "Busy's one word." The widow shivered again as the engines nudged them towards approach vector. Arg didn't trust the autopilot to handle dock runs. Said it had been buggy since before she was born. So his hands stayed firm on the controls. Kara let him. He needed the work of it, the feel of ship against his palms, especially when the walls closed in on him the way the stations did. The hub grew sharper, details resolving in the glow of navigation lights. Rust streaks ran like scars down its main housing. Antennae bristled from its surface, bent and twisted in places like broken bones. It was no pristine EarthGov station, no polished ring habitat with gardens in the middle. This was belt work. Welds stacked ugly, pipes running outside hull plating because it was easier than threading them inside. Functional, brutal, alive. Kara couldn't stop staring. After Helix ruins and the Dust Widow's silence, this looked like civilization clawing itself together with bloody fingernails. "Why here?" she asked. Arg didn't look at her. "Supplies. Widow's low." That was true enough. She'd seen the rations. Half a crate of packets, most stale from long storage. Water recycler needed new filters. Power cells were limping along, patched with old circuit boards and Arg's stubbornness. They'd made it this far, but any longer and the ship would start failing in ways that couldn't be patched with ducting wire. She nodded, though part of her knew that wasn't the full answer. He could have taken them to smaller depots, cleaner stops, places with less traffic, less politics. But he'd brought the widow here, to this hub. Maybe even he didn't know why yet. A hiss of static filled the cockpit as comms cracked open. A sharp voice cut through. "Unregistered rig, state purpose." Arg's jaw tightened. He thumbed the mic. "Dust Widow, independent, coming in for resupply." There was a pause, only the faint hiss of open channel. Then, "Widow, you are cleared to dock 14. Don't block the queue." The channel snapped closed. Arg exhaled through his nose, a sound more like annoyance than relief, and nudged the widow into line behind a string of haulers. Kara saw the names stenciled on their flanks. Brass Coin, Lancer, Hound's Run. None looked like they'd survive a hard bump, but they kept coming, one after the other, like veins bleeding ore into the hub's belly. "Feels like a city," Kara whispered. Arg gave her a sidelong glance. "It is a city, just one with no ground to stand on." She let the words hang there, staring at the hub as it loomed closer. The docking clamps hit with a hollow thud that vibrated through the Widow's hull. The ship shuddered, then stilled. A moment later, atmosphere warnings blinked green across the console. Airlock seals confirmed. Arg leaned back, rubbing a hand over his face. We'll make it quick. In and out. No getting tangled. Kara smiled faintly. You always say that. His eyes flicked to her, but he didn't answer. He unbuckled, boots thudding heavy against the deck as he rose. She followed. The Widow's airlock was cramped, paint flaking from the walls. Kara clipped her belt tight, fragments hanging heavy at her side. They hadn't so much as flickered since the chamber. Just inert stone now, but she couldn't leave them behind. Arg slung his old bag over his shoulder, the one patched more times than it was whole, and keyed the lock. The door ground open with a squeal. Station air flooded in, sharp with ozone, thick with recycled sweat, and under it all, the tang of fried oil. The sound hit next. Voices, machinery, the steady thump of hauler boots on steel decking. Kara stepped out and felt the shift in gravity. Half spin, station rings pulling at her bones. After Widow's drifting weightlessness, it felt wrong and heavy. The dock stretched wide, lined with ships jammed nose to tail. Welders sparked at the hulls. Cargo drones crawled like insects, hauling crates toward yawning bays. People swarmed everywhere, miners with soot-streaked faces, haulers in grease-stained coveralls, vendors shouting about water rations and scrap deals. Kara breathed it in, eyes wide. Arg didn't slow. He moved through the crowd with shoulders squared, a rock in the stream. People glanced at him, some quick, some lingering. Recognition flickered here and there, not just curiosity. She caught fragments of whispers. That him? Void Miner Channel. Arston, right? Kara's brow furrowed, but she kept close. They found the market ring 2 levels down, rows of stalls crammed together, hawkers calling over one another, selling everything from ration packs to black market stimulants. Kara trailed her hand over a rack of data slates, most cracked or half fried. She felt Arg's gaze on her and pulled her hand back. They haggled for filters first. Arg handled it like he handled rock. Blunt force. No wasted words, just a stare until the vendor knocked 2 credits off. Kara picked up spare ration packs, ignoring the sour look from the hauler woman selling them. Then tools, then wiring. Piece by piece, their packs filled. It was while Arg was bent over a bin of power cumplinks that Kara noticed him. The man stood taller than most, his uniform worn but still bearing the insignia of station command. Not EarthGov, not exactly military, but authority stamped in every crease. His hair was short, iron gray, his skin pitted from years in vacuum, and his eyes, sharp, scanning, locked into Arg with a flicker of recognition. He started moving towards them. Kara touched Arg's arm, low. Someone's coming. Arg straightened, turning. His face shifted when he saw the man. Not fear, not quite anger. More the hardened look of a miner bracing for rockfall. The commander stopped a pace away, hands behind his back. His gaze held Arg's. Then he smiled. Not wide, not political. Just the kind of man gives when something he's hoped for suddenly appears in front of him. Void Miner, he said. His voice carried over the noise of the market. Arg Arston. The words froze the air around them. A few heads turned. Kara felt the shift, the ripple of interest. Arg's jaw tightened. That channel's dead. Not to me, the commander said. His eyes didn't waver. I watched every log, every run, every salvage. You spoke for the miners out there, for the ones that no one else gives a damn about. Kara glanced between them, pulse quick. She'd seen Arg deal with Rex, with helix horrors, with chambers that stripped him bare. But this kind of attention set his teeth on edge worse than any trial. The commander didn't press forward, didn't crowd him, just stood there, voice steady. This hub is tearing itself apart. Factions clawing at scraps, haulers fighting miners, foremen playing politics while the rock chews men alive. They need someone who remembers what it's like out there, someone they can trust. Ark's eyes narrowed. Not me. The commander tilted his head slightly. You miners need a voice. Think about it. Chapter 1. The Hub. The commander's words stuck in Ark's skull long after the man had gone, like grit caught under a fingernail. You miners need a voice. Think about it. Ark didn't want to think about it. Didn't want to think about anything beyond the parts list in his head and the weight of the supplies hanging on his back. But walking through the hub made it impossible to shut the thought out. The place was a mess. The widow's narrow dock had bled out into a corridor barely wide enough for two haulers to pass without knocking shoulders. Every wall panel carried old weld scars and patches of tape. Ducting rattled overhead, coughing recycled air that tasted of rust. Someone had painted over the bulkheads in a color that might have been white 50 years ago, but now it was just streaked gray that made the corridor look diseased. And the people? They filled the passage in clumps, moving like ore chunks knocked loose in a chute, colliding and grating past each other. Miners in pressure-stained suits with the dust still clinging to their boots. Hauler crews in jackets sewn with the names of their ships. Badges clattering. Vendors dragging carts of filters and protein bricks, shouting at anyone who came close. Kara moved a step ahead of him, weaving through the press with a kind of ease he never had. She looked at everything. Ark kept his eyes forward, jaw clenched. The noise pressed in, a constant hum of voices layered with the thrum of engines deeper in the station. This hub wasn't built for silence. It was built for extraction. Ore, labor, credits. Everything stripped, nothing left. Ark could feel it in the way the deck plates vibrated under his boots, as if the station itself was straining, ready to crack. A fight broke out just ahead. Two miners slammed into each other, shouting over the unseen slight. One's face was purple with drink, the other pale and sharp-eyed. Their voices rose above the din, words blurred but ugly. Then a fist flew, glancing off a cheekbone with a wet smack. Shouts surged, people pressing in. Ark stopped short, instinct tightening in his chest. He'd seen this before, too many times. Shove, strike, escalation, blood in the airlock. The station's security didn't appear. Not yet. Kara glanced back at him, eyes sharp. For a heartbeat, he thought she might step forward, try to mediate. But then another shove sent both miners crashing into a stall of ration packs. The vendor screamed, waving a metal pipe. The crowd roared, half laughing, half jeering. Ark put a hand on Kara's shoulder and steered her left. Not our fight, he muttered. She didn't argue, but he saw the flicker in her expression, the way she kept looking back, like the chaos was a puzzle she wanted to solve. They pushed deeper into the hub. The station opened wider near its core. Ark had been through hubs before, some small, some only skeleton crews, but this one was sprawling. The central concourse stretched in a wide circle, levels stacked above and below, catwalks strung like spider webs between. Hollow signs flickered in different languages, most glitching from poor upkeep. Vents spat bursts of hot air that reeked of fried oil and coolant. Everywhere, factions carved out their corners. A group of miners huddled by a stairwell, their jackets stenciled with the logo of a private rig company, voices low and sharp. Across the way, haulers in heavy coats argued with a foreman, waving slates in his face. On the far side, Kara pointed to a table where a half dozen freelancers sat with weapons in easy reach, eyes scanning for work or trouble. Arg took it all in with a sour taste in his mouth. This wasn't a hub. This was a fracture point. All these people jammed together, each pulling in their own direction. No chain of command, no shared rhythm, just noise. And underneath it, he recognized something worse. Desperation. Every glance, every shove, every barked word smelled of it. The kind that drove men to cut corners on seals, to skip checks on their gear, to gamble away the last of their credits hoping for one big strike. It was the kind of desperation that killed more miners than any rockfall. Kara slowed at his side, her eyes roaming the concourse, with a strange light in them. "There's potential here," she said under her breath, as if speaking more to herself than him. "Potential for what?" Art grunted. Her gaze slid to a group of younger miners, setting up a makeshift board, chalking out shifts and claim times. She watched the way they argued, but still paused to listen when one barked an order. Then she looked back at Arg, her voice thoughtful. "For something better. If someone could just—" She trailed off, shaking her head. Arg didn't press. He already knew what she meant, and he wanted no part of it. They crossed into a section of the hub where the lights flickered dimmer, the air thicker. Vendors clustered here too, but these stalls sold more than tools and food. Stimulants in cracked vials, black market filters stripped from dead rigs, even knives laid out like trophies. Arg felt the shift in the crowd, eyes sharper, hungrier. He kept his hand near his belt, not for a weapon. He hadn't carried much since Helix, but for the readiness to shove Kara behind him if it came to that. She noticed, of course. She always did. "You don't trust them?" she murmured, not looking at him. "Don't trust any of them," he said. "Not even me?" she asked, a hint of a smile playing at her lips. Arg shot her a look. She didn't flinch. Instead, she glanced around again, studying the chaos, the way crews bartered and fought and scraped to hold ground. "It's messy," she admitted softly, "but messy doesn't mean hopeless." He didn't answer, because to him, messy often meant dead. A loudspeaker crackled overhead, spitting static before a distorted voice called out about docking delays. The announcement barely cut through the din. People shouted over it, arguments climbing higher. Somewhere, deep in the hub, a klaxon wailed, then cut off as if someone had silenced it by force. Arg felt his chest tighten. The widow had been quiet, even broken, patched, limping along. She had been his face. This was suffocation wrapped in steel. He forced himself to keep moving, keep scanning. That was survival, watching the weld seams, the weak points in the station bulkheads, the strain in the faces around him. Kara stayed close, but he could tell she wasn't seeing the danger the same way. She was seeing connection, lines between people, threads that could be tied tighter if someone just reached for them. He envied her that, even as it made him wary. At last, they reached the supply quarter. Stalls stretched in tight rows, stacked with everything a rig might need. Oxygen canisters, cracked helmets, patch kits. Ark fell into rhythm here, checking stock, comparing prices, haggling in short bursts. This, at least, he understood. But even in the bargaining, he saw the cracks. Vendors set different prices depending upon the jacket a man wore. Credits traded with knives in plain sight. Factions muscling in to push smaller sellers aside. He caught Kara watching it all, eyes narrowed, calculating. And that's when it hit him. Not just the noise, not just the chaos, but the inevitability of it. This hub was going to tear itself apart. Arg exhaled, long and rough, as if spitting the words free from his chest. This place is going to eat itself alive. Chapter 2. The Commander's Pitch. Kara followed Arg through the labyrinthine corridors of the hub, her boots clanging against the warped steel plates, the smell of burnt oil and recycled air clinging to her skin like a second layer. The station was alive in a way the Dust Widow never had been, not gentle or patient like the silent void, but insistent, biting, demanding attention at every turn. Engines thrummed in the background, a low vibration that made her chest tighten, while the chatter of crews and vendors formed a constant roar, never letting her mind settle. Arg moved ahead of her like a man carrying the weight of everything that had come before him. His eyes scanned constantly, catching the flex in a bulkhead, a weld gone weak, the slight imbalance of a cargo crane overhead. Every detail mattered to him. Every fault was a potential death sentence. And Kara, as usual, trailed slightly behind, absorbing the same details but seeing opportunity in them. Where Arg saw danger, she saw thread she could pull together. Where he saw decay, she noted the hidden structure, the potential to shape it. They turned into a narrower passage, one lined with abandoned service ports and hissing conduits. Here the station smelled of stale metal and oil, with undertones of sweat and burnt rations. Kara's eyes traced the grime-streaked walls, noticing the fingerprints of decades of maintenance, the way a pipe had been patched with duct tape and welded seams, the signs of improvisation that kept the hub functioning. Arg's jaw was tight, and she caught him tracing a line along the conduit with his fingers, silent, deliberate, as though he were reading the life of the station in the metal itself. I don't like it, he muttered under his breath. Like what? She asked softly, careful to keep her voice low. This, he said, sweeping a hand to indicate everything. The corridors, the chaos spilling from the side room, the vendors hawking rations and the black market filters, the workers arguing over space on the docking clamps. All of it. One spark and this place burns. Kara let him speak, absorbing the cadence of his mistrust. It was familiar, worn into him like the calluses on his hands. And though she shared his caution, her mind worked differently. Her eyes scanned the room again, seeing where crews could be coordinated, where supply lines could be made more efficient, where safety could be enforced without anyone noticing until the benefits were undeniable. She glimpsed the first thread of a network forming, a skeleton that could grow into something more, and it excited her. They entered a small antechamber, the flicker of a failing overhead light revealing the peeling paint on the walls. Kara could see the faint ghost of a mural, a star chart that had been meticulously drawn decades ago, now cracked and fading, almost beyond recognition. Here in this quiet pocket of the hub, the commander waited. He was taller than she'd expected, with broad shoulders that filled the doorway, and a stance that marked him as someone accustomed to authority without needing to shout it. His uniform, though faded and patched, was clean, precise, a deliberate contrast to the hub's chaos. Miner Ashton, the man said, his voice firm but calm, carrying easily over the hum of the station. He inclined his head in greeting, eyes flickering briefly to Kara before returning to Arg. And partner. Good. Saves me the trouble of repeating myself. Arg stiffened, muscles coiling as he half-turned instinctively, prepared to retreat. Kara noticed the tension, the tight line of his jaw, the weight he carried like armor. The commander didn't press, didn't step closer. He simply waited, hands clasped behind his back, his gaze unwavering. You've seen the concourse, Commander said, voice measured, deliberate. You know what it is. Factions scrambling for scraps, crews grinding against each other, mistakes piling up into fatalities. Every day someone dies because no one enforces standards, because no one watches the gaps. That's the truth of it, and the hub bleeds from it. Arg didn't move. His eyes scanned the walls, the vents, the bulkheads, like he was searching for structural weakness, anything that could justify stepping away. Kara stepped closer, feeling the subtle shift of the man beside her, sensing the tension he carried like a coiled spring. The commander continued, undeterred. I'm not here to lecture you, Miner. You've lived this. You've recorded it. The Void Miner channel isn't just logs and videos. It's credibility. People listen when you speak because they know you've survived what they haven't. You know the stakes. You know the cost. And because of that, you have the power to change the way this place functions. Kara caught the faint twitch in Arg's eyes. He didn't want power, didn't want responsibility, didn't want recognition. But she knew him well enough to see the flicker of interest buried deep under layers of skepticism and old scars. I'm no leader, Arg said, voice low, rasping like gravel sliding over steel. The room fell into a quiet that felt unnatural, a stillness that pressed against Kara's ears. Even the faint hum of the hub seemed muted here, as if the station were listening too. She watched the commander carefully, noting how he didn't flinch, didn't argue, simply held his gaze, letting the words settle. You don't have to be, the commander replied evenly. Leadership isn't about titles or authority. It's about influence, about showing people a way forward, giving them a framework to survive and thrive. The hub is tearing itself apart because no one provides it. You can. Not alone, never alone, but you can be the beginning. Kara's chest tightened. She felt the weight of those words in a different way than Arg did. She understood the danger, the risk, the burden, but she also saw the possibility, the fragile beginnings of cohesion where chaos reigned. She felt it in the alignment of crews, the murmurs of respect for Arg, the subtle nods when he passed. Arg's jaw flexed, and she caught him staring at the cracked star chart in the corner, tracing the faint lines as if trying to read a hidden message in the dust. And if I say no? He asked, voice tight, defensive. Then things continue as they are, the commander said flatly. People die, crews fracture, the hub bleeds credits and life because no one speaks for them. That's the reality, Miner. You can either do something, or you watch it all rot around you. Kara stepped closer, keeping her voice low, personal. You don't have to lead, she said. Just just help. Arg's eyes flickered to her, narrowed, wary. He hated being pushed, hated being singled out, but she saw the way the edge softened just a fraction, how the rigid line of his shoulders shifted. He wasn't agreeing. He wasn't even nodding, but she knew he'd heard her. The commander's gaze lingered on Arg, then shifted back to Kara, giving a subtle nod. Approval, but quiet, acknowledging her role in grounding him. Kara felt the pulse of the hub behind the walls, the constant movement, the way the station itself seemed to feed off the tension in its corridors. She imagined a network forming, lines of communication, informal agreements, safety standards creeping into the chaos, a skeleton of order that could grow if someone was willing to hold it together. Arg exhaled, long and measured, running a hand down the length of his face. He didn't speak. Kara could see the old armor, the weight of loss, the habit of solitude pressing down. But she also saw something else, the trace of recognition, the flicker of responsibility he hadn't yet accepted. He stayed in that half-light, listening to the hum of the station, the distant clang of a crane, the shouts of a dock worker arguing over a manifest. It all layered together, the chaos, the danger, the possibility, and for the first time, Kara felt like the station could be more than it was. Finally, Arg muttered almost under his breath, This place, it's a mess. Yes, Kara replied softly, but it doesn't have to stay that way. Ark's gaze returned to her briefly, searching, skeptical, exhausted, but he didn't dismiss her. That was enough for now. The commander cleared his throat, breaking the fragile pause. Think on it, Miner. I'll leave you with that. The hub has teeth. You can either sharpen them or be chewed. Your call. Kara felt the weight of the words settle in her chest. She glanced at Ark, his figure rigid, a man not given to reflection, yet now standing on the cusp of choice. She saw the wheels turning in his mind, the subtle shift as he measured risk against necessity, solitude against survival. You don't have to lead, she repeated, quieter this time. Just help. Ark's eyes softened fractionally, a micro shift she caught and held on to. He didn't nod, he didn't agree, but for now, the seed had been planted. Kara took a breath, letting the hum of the station fill her, the press of bodies outside, the sharp tang of oil and sweat and metal. She imagined the hub not as it was, but as it could be, a network, a guild, a voice for the miners. And she believed if Arg could be convinced, even partially, they could begin to shape it. The commander finally stepped back, hands behind his back again, his eyes still sharp. I'll give you time, he said, but don't wait too long. The hub doesn't forgive indecision. Arg didn't move. Kara noticed the tight line of his jaw relaxed fractionally. Not much. Not enough for anyone else to see, but enough for her. They left the small briefing room, returning to the press of the concourse. Kara moved slightly ahead of Arg, noting every interaction, every look of respect that passed when he brushed past a miner or vendor. She could feel it, the subtle deference that came not from orders or force, but from lived experience, from credibility in the void. She smiled faintly. One step closer, she thought, one thread woven into the larger fabric of something new. Arg kept his eyes forward, scanning the decks and bulkheads as if nothing had happened, as if the commander's pitch were just another noise to filter out. Bakara could read the lines of tension, the slight shift of posture. He had heard her. He had listened. And that, she decided, was enough for now. Chapter 3. Belt on Edge. The hub never stopped working. Arg knew that before he stepped onto the docking concourse. But knowing and feeling were two different things. It pressed on the skin, rattled the bones, weighed on the stomach like a constant tremor. Every corridor was a hive of sound, engines idling, weld sparks striking metal, air scrubbers sighing under strain, and a tangle of voices, shouting, bartering, and cursing. Kara trailed a half step behind him, careful not to collide with the endless traffic, but her eyes scanned everywhere. He noticed the way her shoulders twitched, the way her hands flexed against her belt, cataloging every interaction, every glance. He didn't say anything. She didn't need him to. Her presence was quiet but constant, a tether he was slowly learning to recognize. They moved past docking bays where haulers were being craned up and down, the air thick with dust, oil, and the tang of recycled metal. Arg kept his eyes low, scanning the floors and walls, mentally counting the wear marks, the patched conduits, the dents in the bulkheads. This hub had been built from a dozen different stations, welded and bolted together, each section older and more fragile than the last. Parts of it were pristine, polished by EarthGov inspectors who rarely stepped foot here, but most of it was scarred, patched, and bleeding rust-colored paint, remnants of collisions or careless operations. It was chaotic, ugly, and alive in the way a wounded animal was alive, twitchy, dangerous, unpredictable. Kara stepped onto a graded walkway above a maintenance bay and glanced down at a pair of riggers trying to maneuver a crate too large for the lift. "That's not going to fit," she murmured, almost to herself. Her voice was quiet, and yet Arg caught it, the faint inflection of concern threading through her observation. He looked at her sideways, not turning his head, noting how she always seemed to notice things he didn't. Human patterns, subtle signs, small mistakes that might spiral into disaster. She was always observing, always cataloging. He grunted acknowledgment and let her be. The maintenance bay itself was a war zone. 3 mining sleds sat on cradles, each one patched, dented, or worse. The first had a drill boom haphazardly welded back in place. The welds were fat and sloppy, too close to the hydraulic seals. The second sled had a patch plate crudely applied over a hull breach, sealant already cracking. The third looked worse than the others, nothing but tape over a seam to hold it together. Ark felt his teeth grind. He could hear Kara's breath behind him, soft but tense. He stepped closer. "Amateurs," he muttered. Not a question, not an insult, a statement. Kara leaned slightly closer, watching the workers' reactions. The kids, most barely out of their teens, froze for a heartbeat. One wiry welder waved a torch too close to a fuel line. Ark's hand shot out before he thought, shoving the kid aside and snapping the torch out of his grip. "You trying to blow this bay into the void?" he barked. The welders stared, mouths opening, closing. Kara's hands hovered near his elbow, not touching, but close enough that he felt the weight of her observation, the unspoken critique. "I had it under control," the kid said, trying to puff himself up. "You didn't have shit," Arg replied flatly, tossing the torch into a crate. He jabbed a finger at the sled. "That patch won't survive a single hull. You vent that chamber, you're dead before you burn through half the seam." Kara's gaze flickered to him, calm but sharp. "Maybe you could explain it without yelling," she suggested. "They might listen if you—" She didn't finish, because Arg wasn't interested in soft pedagogy. He was interested in survival, in competence, in not seeing another miner's life wasted by ignorance or carelessness. He straightened, fingers flexing. "No," he said. "They'll listen when they want to breathe tomorrow." She nodded, lips pressed together, and didn't argue further. That was her way of staying close, even when he refused her kind of diplomacy. She wasn't leaving him behind. She was learning how to be present while letting him lead in the areas he trusted: machines, procedures, reality. They moved on, slipping through the crush of the hub like two ghosts navigating a war zone. Arg kept his eyes on the structural elements: bulkhead integrity, corroded conduit, welds under stress, panels that vibrated too easily under the footfalls of hundreds of bodies. Kara stayed just behind, speaking softly when necessary, noticing which sections of the hub seemed prone to accidents, which faction crews were tensing against each other. Her attention was everywhere, and he grudgingly admitted it was useful, though he would never say that out loud. They arrived at the central plaza, a chaotic open area where half a dozen corridors converged. Merchants hawked everything from spare grav clamps to dubious medical supplies. Banners of factions and salvage crews hung from bulkheads, faded paint peeling under the relentless air scrubber's heat. Miners and haulers bickered openly over dock times, shipping fees, and ore claims. Security drones hovered lazily, their sensors barely registering the ebb and flow of movement below. The crowd was dense, layered in human noise and metallic spells. Kara moved slightly ahead, weaving between bodies while her eyes flicked to Arg, checking for reactions, checking for signs he'd engage. He didn't. He observed the mechanics of the space, the flaws in construction, the frayed cables above, and the stress echoed into every human face. Then the spark hit. A fight. Small. Almost incidental at first. A shove over a docking fee. A spat over a late shipment. but it spread like a virus. Arg and Kara slowed instinctively, moving toward the edge of the fray. Miners squared off against a gang of red and black jackets. Weapons were drawn. Pistols, shock batons, knives. The crowd thickened, some cheering, some backing away. Kara's hand brushed his arm. "It's getting worse," she said, voice steady but tense. "I see it," he muttered, eyes narrowing. "It's the hub. Always the hub." The first bottle flew. A simple plastic container, but enough. It smashed against a bulkhead, shattering with a sharp crack. Arg's head snapped to the source. The fight broke fully. Bodies collided. Fists swinging. Weapons clashed. The smell of metal, sweat, and fear filled the air. Kara stayed close, hands flexing at her sides, watching, not panicking. Her presence was a steadying force even when the chaos threatened to overwhelm them. "Walk," he said, tugging gently on her arm. "Stay close." They skirted around the worst of it, weaving through the side corridors, witnessing small skirmishes erupting over claims, shipments, or just bad luck. Arg's mind calculated every potential hazard. A falling crate, a misfired welding torch, a panic stampede. Kara's observations completed his. She noted where tempers were highest, where the crowd was likely to push into conflict, where factions were waiting for someone to step wrong. She was building a map he couldn't see with machines and numbers alone. As they moved deeper into the hub, Arg allowed himself a small recognition of her role. She wasn't a liability. She was a guide in a human landscape that machines couldn't measure. Still, he didn't speak. He kept his gruff silence as a shield, letting her presence thread through the day without acknowledgement. They paused in a narrow corridor, the walls scarred, patched, and worn. A crew of miners passed by, grumbling about shipment delays. A gang member brushed against Arg's shoulders. Sharp words spat, but he ignored them, focusing instead on the stress fractures in the hull panel above. Kara's hand brushed his sleeve, just a hint, reminding him that she was there. He stiffened, not uncomfortable, just aware. A subtle tension passed between them, unspoken acknowledgement that they were tethered, observing the same chaos, reacting differently, but in unison. A few decks up, Arg inspected a series of repair bays. Welders were young, inexperienced, some patched with tape, others with adhesive barely rated for the pressure. One of the rigs had a fractured conduit sparking occasionally. Arg grabbed a fire suppressant hose, dousing it before it could ignite anything critical. Kara stayed at his side, watching, keeping other miners clear. She offered advice quietly, asking if he wanted a hand. He shook his head, muttered a gruff thanks, but he noticed the way she didn't step back, the way she claimed proximity without demanding space. Hours passed like this. They moved from deck to deck, corridor to corridor, slipping through the thrumming, restless hub. Arguments broke out over shipments. Small scuffles were diffused by sheer intervention or retreat. Arg muttered under his breath, notes and calculations flowing in his head. Kara occasionally spoke, quietly, offering insight into human dynamics, nudging him toward awareness he refused to admit he needed. They were, slowly, learning how to navigate both the chaos and each other's presence. Finally, near a docking bay where freighters queued like cattle, Arg leaned against a bulkhead, boots scraping the metal. Kara was next to him, silent now, observing a group of miners arguing over priority access to a hauler. The tension hung in the air like charged plasma. He rubbed his jaw, exhaled, and muttered, low, just enough for her to hear. "This place is gonna eat itself alive." Kara didn't flinch. She only leaned slightly closer, shoulder brushing his, acknowledging the truth without contesting it. Her quiet presence was almost heavier than the noise, a tether to reality, a reminder that even here, In this maelstrom of metal, greed, and desperation, they were not alone. And for Arg, that mattered. Not much, not in words, but enough to make the next step through this fractured hub slightly more bearable. Chapter 4. Kara's Mediation. The hub's metal ribs vibrated underfoot, a living skeleton of grates, bulkheads, and scaffolding that groaned with every passing rig, hauler, and footstep. Kara moved carefully along the grated walkway, boots clanging lightly against the steel as sparks flickered somewhere below. Air scrubbers wheezed in the corridors, thick with the scent of burnt metal and recycled oxygen. She kept her eyes sharp, noting every human movement, every nervous glance. Arg walked ahead, methodical, his steps measured, his eyes scanning the shadow for structural weaknesses, faulty welds, and anything that might collapse under the weight of careless miners. He barely acknowledged her presence, and yet she knew he felt it. The quiet tether between them, subtle but undeniable. The first argument of the day began near a maintenance bay. Two haulers were disputing a docking priority, voices raised, anger sharp and raw. One shoved the other's crate. Sparks flew from the impact against metal plating. Kara moved forward, voice calm and firm, projecting over the cacophony. "Enough," she said, stepping between the two crews. Her hand brushed against a railing to steady herself, a slight reminder that she was present, careful but unafraid. "We fix the problem first. Nobody goes anywhere hurt. Nobody loses their shipment. Then we talk." Arg leaned against a nearby bulkhead, arms crossed, silent. He watched her work, approving in the only way he knew how, through observation, noting her decisions, calculating risks. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Kara's quiet command was enough to hold the chaos at bay. The foreman scowled at her. "And who are you to tell us how to run our crews?" "Someone who's been where you are," Kara said evenly. "Someone who's seen what happens when tempers break and lives are lost. I'm here so that doesn't happen today. That's all." Her eyes didn't flinch from his. Her voice carried authority without ego. The foreman hesitated, then muttered, "Fine." The fight cooled before it could escalate. Kara exhaled slowly, tension leaving her in waves she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Arg finally spoke, low and rough. "This shouldn't be happening." Kara nodded. "Nothing about this place is supposed to be easy," she said, sweeping her gaze across the bay. "But someone has to stop it from falling apart." They continued their rounds. Every corridor, every bay, every docking platform had a new hazard. A fractured conduit here, a poorly patched hull panel there, human tempers at the edge of eruption. Kara intervened when necessary, offering calm guidance, redirecting aggression, and mediating disputes. Arg stayed close, silently reinforcing her authority when a physical intervention became necessary, occasionally stepping in to redirect a torch or stabilize a load. Hours passed in this rhythm. Kara noted patterns, small victories, and weak points in the human network she was beginning to map. She cataloged foremen likely to escalate conflicts, crews who were surprisingly receptive, factions already leaning towards alliance or competition. Arg followed her, his mind always on structural integrity, machinery, and safety. But Kara began to see his attention shift subtly towards people, small glances, tiny acknowledgments of her interventions. The hub's energy was exhausting, but even as the fatigue crept in, Kara's attention never wavered. Every time a skirmish was diffused, she felt a subtle pulse of satisfaction. Every time Arg moved to prevent a mechanical failure, she noticed the slight softening of his stance when he glanced at her. There was a rhythm forming between them, unspoken and fragile, like two dancers learning to move together in zero gravity. By late afternoon, Kara and Arg paused near an observation port overlooking the central docking bay. Sunlight, or the simulated equivalent, slashed in streaks across the metal floors, highlighting scuffs, rust, and the constant hum of activity. Ships docked and departed in a slow rhythm. Engines idling, hissing airlocks punctuated the noise. Kara pressed her hand to the cool bulkhead, exhaling. This place, it's fragile, she murmured. Everything depends on how people treat it, how they treat each other. Arg leaned beside her, voice low. Most of them don't care. She let the silence stretch. Even with the chaos, even with threats and accidents, they had managed to step in, hold the line, and survived. Not perfectly, but enough. Then came the question that had been simmering in her mind since they docked. Where are we going to stay? She asked quietly, eyes shifting toward him. The widow's berth is only temporary. We can't stay there forever, not if we're supposed to be here, seeing everything, mediating everything. Arg tensed, jaw tightening. I'm not too keen on hub quarters. Too many eyes, too much risk. You know me. I know, she said, voice calm. But we need access. We need to be close to the people if we're going to do anything here. We can't hide in a ship, watching through sensors. We'll miss the subtleties. We'll miss the cracks before they become fractures. Arg exhaled slowly, rubbing the back of his neck. Fine, but temporary. A week, maybe two. Then we decide if we stay or we move on. Kara nodded, a small victory. Temporary, she agreed. Her eyes flicked to the port, watching a freighter's crew unload machinery with precision born of habit and exhaustion. But close, within the hub. The discussion carried them down a side corridor where a pair of vacant quarters had been assigned. Small, cramped, barely enough room for two people and their gear. The walls were cold metal, paint scuffed, panels patched over years of wear and tear. The air was recycled, slightly stale, and the floor vibrated faintly from engines and docking rings above. Kara stepped in first, scanning the room. Cramped, she muttered, but functional. Mark dropped his bag with a metallic clank, boots thudding against the floor. Functional is good enough. Don't make it fancy. She grinned faintly. I wasn't planning on it. They began unpacking, stacking their minimal belongings against the bulkheads, clearing a small area for sleeping. Kara set up her fragment, inert and quiet, near the corner, while Arg positioned his tools and personal gear along the wall, creating a narrow aisle between them. The space was tight, but they both adjusted, finding balance without intruding on each other unnecessarily. After a brief pause, Kara flopped into the thin bedding they'd been given, pulling a blanket close. It's going to be tight, she said, voice muffled against the pad. Arg leaned against the bulkhead, arms crossed. Tight is fine, he said. Tight keeps things from moving unexpectedly. They shared a quiet moment, listening to the distant hum of engines, the hiss of airlocks, and the faint clanging of metal from the decks above. The hub was alive, restless, chaotic. But here, in this small room, Kara felt the first hint of control. Tomorrow, she said quietly, we'll continue. Walk the corridors, check the crews, mediate where we can. But for tonight, we survive. Arg nodded, shoulders relaxing slightly. Survive, he agreed. She let herself close her eyes, feeling the proximity of him, the shared space that was theirs for now, temporary though it was. The living quarters were small, but they had shelter, they had a foothold, and slowly they had each other. Not yet allies, not yet partners, but a tether forming, quiet and resilient amidst the chaos. Even as fatigue claimed her, Kara's mind cataloged the hub, the factions, the fragile orders they had begun to impose. And through it all, Ark's presence remained steady, silent, grounding. She drifted into half sleep, listening to the hub's constant pulse, aware that tomorrow would demand everything again, and that they would face it together, cramped quarters and all. By the time lights dimmed and the hub settled into a brief, uneasy lull, Kara allowed herself a small private smile. They were mediators now, anchors in the chaos. And even if the space was tight, even if the hub threatened to devour them with its fractured structure and volatile tempers, they had taken the first steps towards something solid. And for Kara, that mattered. Chapter 5. Drafting and Pushbacks. Kara sat cross-legged on the metal floor of their temporary quarters, her tablet balanced on her knees, faint glow illuminating her features in the dim light. The hub outside hummed and clanked through the walls, an uneasing chorus of friction, machinery, and human tension. Arg leaned against the bulkhead opposite her, arms folded, eyes tracing the faint lines of scaffolding, visible through the viewport. He had spent the last hour mapping out traffic flows, checking docking schedules, and marking the riskiest cargo runs. Now he just watched her. She scribbled notes furiously, sketching out the skeleton of what she called a guild, a loose network for miners and haulers, a way to mediate disputes, share safety protocols, and offer practical support. It was ambitious, far-reaching, and, from Mark's perspective, dangerously theoretical. "You're drawing circles," he said finally, voice low but tinged with skepticism. "We don't need circles. We need structures that hold when people start screaming at each other." "I know," Kara replied without looking up, her stylus pausing midair. "That's why I'm starting here. Circles represent the flow of information, not rigid hierarchy. We'll layer structure on top once people see the benefit." Arg let out a breath, heavy and frustrated. "Benefit? You think they'll see benefit before they hit each other with tools?" "They'll see it when it keeps them alive," she said, her voice firm, eyes scanning her notes. "When a rig doesn't collapse because someone followed a protocol we outlined. When disputes get resolved without broken limbs or lost shipments." He leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees, scanning her sketch. "Fine," he muttered, "but the numbers have to add up. Schedules, load limits, safety redundancy. If any of it fails, the guild becomes a punchline." Kara glanced up, a faint smile brushing her lips. "I was hoping you'd say that. That's why I need you." For a while, silence settled over the room, punctuated by the distant clanging and hissing from the corridors. The hum of the hub was relentless, but inside the quarters, the air felt almost private. Kara's mind raced, thinking through every possible scenario, every faction that might resist, every miner who might see the guild as a threat to independence rather than a lifeline. Arg, meanwhile, was quietly plotting contingencies, placement of emergency protocols, redundancy in power distribution, load management across the hub. He wasn't leading. He was building armor. By mid-afternoon, Kara had finished her initial outline. She leaned back, stretching, eyes drifting to the viewport where the docking base teemed with activity. "We'll start small," she said. "Pick a few crews willing to follow simple safety protocols. Track the results. Build credibility before we expand." Arg's brow furrowed. "Credibility? That's earned in blood or scars here, not in charts." "Then we'll prevent blood and scars," Kara said sharply. "That's the point." He let the statement hang. It was a good point, and he knew it. But he still didn't smile. He never really smiled anymore, not in the way she could see behind the gruff surface. The following morning, Kara led them into the corridors, carrying her tablet like a shield. Arg followed, boots heavy, scanning every nook, every platform, every precarious cargo crate. The hub was alive, chaotic, and fragile. Crews were already bickering over docking times, load priorities, and territorial lines marked with chipped paint and crude laser etching. Kara's approach was calm, deliberate, her voice firm without being commanding. Listen up, she called to the nearest foreman and his team. We're going to test something. Protocols for safety. Nothing fancy. Just follow the instructions for the next lift, and we'll see how it goes. No arguments, no shortcuts. The foreman snorted. And who says we follow you? You're not anyone's boss. Kara didn't flinch. I'm not. I'm a mediator. You follow these procedures because it keeps everyone alive. You try them once. That's all I ask. Ark stood to the side, silent, analyzing the logistics of the lift, noting weak points in the scaffolding, checking hoist strengths, verifying that emergency power lines weren't in the path of swinging crates. He didn't speak unless necessary, letting Kara carry the social weight. But when a miner reached for a piece of equipment incorrectly, he stepped in, steadying the load with his gloved hand and muttering, Wrong, you'll snap that. The miner flinched, muttered something under his breath, but corrected the action. Kara's eyes flickered toward Ark, a subtle acknowledgement passing between them. The guild concept wasn't just theoretical anymore. It was being tested in the trenches. By late morning, the lift was complete, safely delivered, no accidents. A few crew members exchanged wary looks, impressed despite themselves. Kara filed the results into her tablet, already plotting the next phase. Arg, meanwhile, cataloged each intervention, noting which elements of the protocol were weak and which would require reinforcement. It was during the midday lull that the first overt resistance appeared. Two hauler teams argued violently over docking rights, voices rising above the hum of engines. Sparks flew as crates were shoved against walls. Kara moved forward immediately, stepping between them. Enough, she said, voice steady, projecting authority. We resolved this with the procedures. Nobody moves until we've measured the impact and assigned priority. The foreman scoffed, crossing his arms. And who the hell are you to decide that? I'm someone who's been where you are, Kara said calmly. Someone who knows how quickly things can go wrong. You follow the procedure for one lift. You'll see why. Ark stepped in quietly, stabilizing a crate, teetering dangerously near the edge of a platform. Step back, he muttered. One wrong move, someone dies. The threat was unspoken but clear. The foreman hesitated, muttered under his breath, then relented. The fight cooled before it could escalate further. Kara exhaled slowly, tension easing from her shoulders. She turned to Ark. This is only the beginning. He nodded, eyes scanning the hub. If someone doesn't fix this, people are going to die. Procedures won't be enough if tempers flare. They'll learn, she said quietly, or they'll get out of the way. Either way, we start shaping behavior before it spirals completely. Over the next few days, Kara and Arg implemented incremental steps. Protocols were laid out for lift schedules, power allocation, and safety checks. Arg contributed logistical solutions, designing redundancy systems, optimizing load distribution, and ensuring that nothing relied purely on human compliance. Kara handled the interpersonal challenges, diffusing arguments, coaching reluctant crews, and smoothing the friction points that threatened the fragile balance. Resistance persisted, of course. Some crews openly mocked the guild concept, calling it unnecessary bureaucracy. Others tried to skirt the procedures, claiming experience and skill were enough. Each challenge tested both the protocols and Kara's ability to mediate without alienating the people she needed to win over. Arg's interventions were purely functional, but each time he quietly enforced safety, the crews noticed, and slowly, grudging respect began to form. During one particularly tense incident, a crane operator ignored a newly established weight protocol, risking a collapsed load above the docking bay. Kara intervened verbally, backing him down with authority. while Arg ran calculations, redirected counterweights, and stabilized the load. The crate landed safely, and the operator muttered a reluctant acknowledgement. Kara shot Arg a look of quiet triumph. He only grunted, eyes returning to the next precarious situation. By the end of the week, a few key crews had accepted the procedures. Minor incidents had been avoided, and the concept of a guild had tangible credibility. The hub still hummed with tension. Chaos was still present, but the cracks were less likely to become fractures. The station commander, watching from the observation platform, finally approached them. His eyes lingered on Arg. "You sound like a leader already," he said, a faint smile playing on his lips. Kara glanced at Arg, who merely shrugged, face impassive. They returned to their temporary quarters that evening, exhaustion heavy, but satisfaction quiet. Kara filed her notes, reviewed crew compliance, and prepared incremental changes. Arg checked the structural reinforcements and system logs. In the small room, stacked with their minimal belongings, they shared a rare moment of silence, letting the weight of accomplishment settle. "You're making a difference," Kara said softly, watching him. "I'm doing my job," he replied, tone rough but approving. "Your job is keeping them alive," she said, "and so far you're damn good at it." He finally allowed a brief nod. The space between them was small but sufficient. No words of affection, no dramatic statements, just the acknowledgement that they were tethered together in purpose and trust. Outside, the hub lights flickered against the metal floors and scaffolding, life and machinery interwoven in endless rhythm. Inside, Kara and Narg had carved a foothold, shaping order from chaos. The guild was no longer an idea on paper. It was beginning to live, breathed into existence by procedures, interventions, and the subtle force of trust forming between two people who had no choice but to rely on each other. And for the first time in the hub, amidst the noise, the friction, and the stubborn human resistance, that concept of survival through cooperation began to take root. The end of Part 1 of Void Miner, Guild of Stone.